For more than 60 years, people have been walking through centuries of Boston history thanks to the Freedom Trail. The trail provides locations and guidance, and it's getting more accessible as a result of some recent improvements. To bring us up to date is the executive director of the Freedom Trail, Suzanne Taylor. Thank you very much for being with us, Suzanne.
Thank you.
First of all, talk about the history of the trail itself. You would think something like this had been around forever, but I guess it started in the 1950s. So
It did.
What brought that about?
There was a writer, actually media person, who wrote for the Boston Traveler, the Boston Herald Traveler to be exact, and he came up with an idea with a friend, and they thought that it would be a great way to be able to bring people to the historic sites that were already in Boston. There was no wayfinding, and so he came up with the idea, and he wrote to City Hall, to the mayor at the time, Mayor John Hines, and it grew from there.
Now, I think just the effect of having the concept of the trail, I guess that has played a role in what's happened to these vestiges of history, especially the three-dimensional vestiges. So how would you sum that up?
Well, the trail itself is so important because it does bring people to these historic sites, and there's so much marketing that goes along with the Freedom Trail itself, that people know the Freedom Trail and they come so that they can see these historic sites. They're all nationally, historically significant, so it's really a fantastic wayfinding tool.
Well, certainly what I've noticed over the years is that we're really serious about preserving the physical history, putting things on the building so that if you're just passing randomly sometimes, you're going to see some information. So I guess this is where we keep history speaking.
We do. We bring history to life, as we say, at the Freedom Trail Foundation and at all the sites, and also at the National Park Service as well in Boston. So there are a number of signs that are out there. We're working with the city to improve signage along the Freedom Trail, which is part of the new improvements that have been going on the last couple of years. But there's also signage, like you mentioned, on particular sites as well, right on their facades.
Well, one of the things you have to look out for is preserving the infrastructure of the trail itself, or even making it better in some ways. There has been some work already started. So what kind of differences can people notice right now?
Well, at the historic sites, they're preserving all of the time. That's their mission, to preserve the sites that they run and to bring their history to life. But the city of Boston works tirelessly to make sure that the trail itself is kept up, and recently have been doing quite a bit of work on the physical trail, and also getting to the sidewalks, pedestrian ramps and whatnot.
No, I've noticed over the years is sometimes when I'm looking at those red bricks, sometimes, well, it's like a missing tooth here and there. Things start to get a little worse for wear. So I guess you got to have that fixed up then, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And a lot of the times we'll get the phone call, and I'll talk with somebody that's a resident or someone who's visiting, and we'll pinpoint exactly where the repair needs to be made. And then I work closely with the commissioner of the Department of Public Works and their team to replace those bricks. And in fact, there is a brick called a Freedom Trail brick. So.
Now, when I was growing up, I thought this was a trail mainly about the War of Independence and the run-up to that. But there's a lot more to the history that this trail goes through.
There sure is. There's 250 years of history or more, from 1600s to all the way to the War of 1812 with the USS Constitution. There's something for everybody.
One of the other things you have going are some new programs. One of them is at nighttime. Talk about that.
It is. We piloted a program last year called a Lantern Tour, and it was a success. So we've now decided that it would be a new offering this year. So we just started it this past Thursday, and it brings history to life at night. So the true dark history of Boston, conducted by tour guides in 18th century costume with a lantern.
And we're talking with Suzanne Taylor from the Freedom Trail Foundation. Tell me a little bit more about this kind of history, because people say, well, this is not about wars and great political figures. So why is it important to tell people about this underside of Boston?
Well, there's a lot of importance that we put on to wars and whatnot. But it's really the daily lives of people that is of interest. Like what Paul Revere did on a day-to-day basis. How he had a family that lived in the Paul Revere house that's in the old, the North End. How people went to church at Old North Church. But there's, the dark side of the story too. Like you had mentioned with the Lantern Tour, it was people that we're trying to get things done, maybe not in the best of ways, but, had fights or some kind of other thing like witch hangings or things of that nature.
If you talk about the contribution of the trail, I know there's some other things going on that draw on the history in some way in Boston, but as far as contributing to the city and I guess educating the city, how would you describe what's unique about the trail?
Well, the trail itself sees over 4 million people a year coming to the trail, but it also educates people in classrooms too. Many of the historic sites have, and the National Park Service and the Freedom Trail Foundation have education programs that we bring into the classroom. So we're educating kids in the neighborhoods, outside of Boston, all over the country and internationally as well. So it's an education tool in addition to something fun to do when you're walking around Boston.
What do you think the effect is on people, whether it's visitors or people who live here all the time? I see them around these different locations. It could be the 54th Regiment or the Old State House, and they're hearing a story. They're really absorbed in it, and they're impressed. What does that mean?
The people that are dressed in 18th century costume that many people see in Boston really add to our community. I mean, it makes our city so historic. And these stories that they're telling people that are enthralled by our history are so important to the fabric of our city. And it really, like I said, makes our city great.
Well, finally, I know this is a nice time of year to be out walking, unless it rains, of course. And you've got some fall programs that people should know about too.
Well, in addition to the Lantern Tour, there's many people walking the trail now. There's all sorts of people in for conferences and on cruises, that kind of thing. People doing Oktoberfest type of let's get out and walk and see the nice trees, like on Boston Common, where the leaves are changing, that kind of thing. But there's really something for everyone, like I said earlier. But in the fall there's programs, but there's programs all year long. The Freedom Trail's open every day, all day, and we have tours that go out 362 days a year.
And I know you must have some details online as well, right?
Absolutely.